So we will get this show on the road. Welcome to the Center of the American West final virtual event for the year 2020. We are calling it Keeping Our Bearings in Unsteady Times, a congenial conversation between Dick Wadhams and Patty Limerick, an experienced practitioner in the world of conservative politics and an armchair quarterback with a muddled political identity. Just so everybody knows, we are recording this event. So if you have friends that you'll want to direct them to after you've enjoyed the event, please just send them to our webpage. It should be up at least in the new year, if not beforehand. Oh, good. Finn Murphy's here too. We do have some Q&A, an opportunity for people to weigh in Q&A, but we aren't going to have a formal Q&A session, just so people are aware. So Patty may weave some of those questions into the conversation as they come up. And we will be back next year in 2021 with more virtual events. You'll be hearing about that, especially a event on the role of creativity in historical research and historical scholarship, and in just understanding how history is done. So that will be coming sometime in February. So, but without further ado, because we have so much to cover, so much ground to cover, I turn it over to the faculty director of the Center of the American West, Patty Limerick.
Thank you, Kurt, and thank you, Dick, for joining me on this. We are really, a young man this morning I was chatting with on Zoom said, good morning. And I said, boy, have you got that right. Good morning, because this is something I look forward to for so long. And what an affirmation to say good morning and to so mean it on this occasion. Because introducing a speaker when the speaker is right here on the participating with me seems a little bit odd. We decided I am going to have us say 4 things about ourselves that we think people should know or may not know. And we can do that. Would you like to start with that, Dick? And then I will do my little 4 things.
Well, sure, Patty. Thank you for having me today. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I'm Dick Wadhams, and I've spent my life, essentially my adult life, working in politics. But just briefly, I'm actually a Colorado native. Grew up in Los Animas in rural southeastern Colorado. Went to the University of Southern Colorado, which was known at the time, and one of my mentors, ironically, was Dr. Wally Steele, who was a very prominent Democratic strategist and lobbyist, and he taught me a lot. And that I've employed over the years as a Republican campaign manager. I have run campaigns for Bill Owens, Wayne Allard, Hank Brown, John Thune in South Dakota, Conrad Burns in Montana. So just this is what I've spent my life doing. And I was Colorado Republican state chairman for 4 years, about 10 years ago. But Patty, one of the things I was thinking about, since we talked about this, is because I really had not really thought about it before. But over the years, the relationships that I've developed, certainly with Republican activists, but for purposes of today's discussion, I have some of the people I respect most in life, and I consider some of my closest friends are my Democratic counterparts. I mean, I've done a show on Channel 4 as a political analyst with Mike Dino, a very prominent guy in the Democratic Party. I was with Steve Welchert at a University of Denver thing earlier this week. Greg Kolmitz, who ran Ritter's campaign. Mary Alice Mandarich, we were on opposite sides in the Owens Shetler campaign for governor in '98. Alan Salazar, chief of staff to, and who's for just about every Democratic official. And I think about all these wonderful people who I've gotten to know, sometimes under strenuous conditions, but it's really been one of the joys of being involved in politics is that I think on the professional level, the professional people in the Democratic Party and people like me in the Republican Party, we developed some pretty good relationships. And I think that's good. I'm not sure, to be honest, that sometimes some of the younger members in both parties are able to do that, but the older guys like me and my counterparts, I think we've been able to do that. So anyway.
That was a great introduction. And me reading your resume would not have had that spirit. That was just, well, would have had good spirit, but not that full thing. So I appreciate that a lot. I chose my 4 things, and it helps with my muddled political identity, since that's true, but also how I am here today. My mother and father were quite liberal. My father was a Democrat from Utah, of all things, and my mother remained a registered Republican, but always said, "Oh, I'm not really one of those." So So I'm not sure exactly what she meant by that, but probably that she had married a Democrat was what she meant by that. So that was my background. They were quite liberal. My father always, just felt that one of his strongest memories was opposing Congressman Nixon in various ways. So then when I went to college, I had a little episode, 1968, where I was at a Regents meeting, University of California Regents, and Governor Reagan was there, and I should have been studying for my freshman astronomy class, but I wasn't because I'd gone to the protest, and I was quite frustrated. And at the end of the event, I hit Governor Reagan's car with my hand, only my hand, not my astronomy textbook. And boo-hoo, that was picked up by the TV cameras, and my mother and father saw that night. And my father had been a writer for Republic Films and had some friends blacklisted in the American Activities thing. So I got the strangest letter from my parents. I didn't really understand the context, but telling me to watch my step. So that was a very interesting, liberal Democrats, but also, well, liberal Republican and Democrat. Then I had many years, the second thing is that I had many years of socializing exclusively, almost exclusively with liberals, mostly other academics. I did that for years and years and years and years. And then I think it might have been boredom as much as anything that made me think, I don't know, this is getting a little, I would have something I was going to say at a dinner party and I would be ready to say it. And then 3 other people would have said it. And I think, oh, well, why did I even come? So as much of anything, it was boredom of thinking, I think I'd like to have some other information coming in and have somebody say something that I wasn't going to say. So I could think about that. So that was what happened maybe 25 or 30 years ago, that I just thought I'd like to be out in the world a little bit more. So that got out of hand. We'll just say that got totally out of hand. And some people, I sometimes say I used to be controversial and contentious, but then I became congenial and collaborative. And some people found that bitter disappointment that I shifted gears on that. But I certainly ended up with a muddled political identity. I am not calm about vast federal spending, worry about posterity with that. There's a number of things that entered my repertoire that had not been there before. So I'm not quite sure what my category is. I have been in long-running dismay. It's my fourth item. Long-running dismay over polarization. I guess because my own trajectory was so opposite to what seemed to be going on more broadly in the nation, that I was thinking, oh, these are very nice people. Who knew? These conservatives are really fun and really pleasant. And so that's where I was headed. And it seemed like the nation was going in more of a divisive form. So I think we have, so my mother and father's politics, my period of socializing with liberals, the emergence of my muddled identity, and then dismay over polarization, with dismay now added dimension of the last 4 years of dismay over having a president who thrives on and advocates divisiveness. So a lot of what I felt was enriching and valuable to my life, the president's manner of conduct was not that. So those are the 4 things that are not exactly news to anyone probably, but those are my 4 things. So now I want us to start with the question. I think I'd like just to leap right in here that President Biden has a repeated statement he makes about hoping for reconciliation, wanting to unify the nation, wanting to get past this period of division, be the president for all Americans. So I would like us both just to say what we would, if we wanted to give him advice, if we had the chance to give him advice, what would we give him on that? Would we have particular approaches and gestures and overtures he should make? I have a streak of thinking it might be the kindest thing to let the poor man out of his misery. Just say, I don't know, that's going to be really hard. Maybe scale down the goal, maybe something short of reconciliation, just tolerance, the putting up with each other. So, okay, so that's, I sort of answered my own question with my own thoughts at that point. So good moment to hand off to you. What do you think?
Well, some of it, I think, will depend on what happens in Georgia on January 5th. Of course, there are 2 U.S. Senate races being determined right now in Georgia. If Republicans win both of those races, or even one of them, there will be a Republican majority. If Democrats win the two of them, there will be it will be a Democratic majority. And so, or it'll be 50-50 is what it'll be, but that'll be a de facto Democratic majority with Vice President-elect Kamala Harris being the tie vote. I have this kind of strange thought that it might be best for Biden if the Senate was actually controlled by Republicans, because I do think that both parties right now have very strong extremes and that are pushing very hard. And I think if there is a Democratic majority, it's going to be hard for a lot of things coming through the Congress that will put this new president on the spot. Otherwise, if it's a Republican Senate, he goes back to 1988 with Mitch McConnell. They were in the Senate together for decades before he got elected vice president. And I just think that McConnell and Biden, they come from a different era in the U.S. Senate. It was back, in fact, that's back when I was working for a U.S. Senator from Colorado, Bill Armstrong. It was a different era. And I think that those two would have a very strong working relationship on, not on everything. But listen, there are fundamental disagreements between Republicans and Democrats on policy, but there are a lot of areas that could be worked together too. And I think McConnell and Biden could work together on a lot of things.
I really appreciate that, because I really had drifted and not been attentive to the fact that those two men come from a world we wouldn't want to go over the top in nostalgia for, but we would be able to say, well, that was different.
Mm-hmm.
The friendships, the genuine, good to see you, buddy. I don't know, that seems like that would be reactivated. So I really appreciate thinking that. And I also want to go with the notion that the parties, I guess my question would be, are the two parties equally divided internally? That is, the wings of the Democrats and the wings of the Republicans, are both parties seem to me quite disunited, quite something other than organized harmonic units of common shared vision and purpose. Would you say they are equally divided, or one is more divided than the other, or
I think probably equally divided, Patty, because they both have these ideological extremes that have really taken over a lot of the party processes of both parties. Now, someone might say, well, how did Joe Biden become the Democratic nominee? And that's a really good question. But the fact is that he was kind of alone out there as the only, I'll use the term moderate, and whereas the rest of the field was fairly much to the left of him, and it kind of got splintered. And so he ended up as the Democratic nominee. But when you look at the turmoil already happening among Democrats with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her kind of wing in the House Democrats already expressing displeasure over Biden appointments, over the Biden agenda. On the Republican side, obviously there's been division in terms of Republicans, frankly, like me, who have not been at all supportive of the president's behavior. I strongly support his agenda in terms of tax cuts, judicial nominations, deregulation, but I have been appalled by his behavior for 4 years. And then there are a lot of Trump loyalists, good people, but they are convinced this election was stolen, and it was not. And they want to continue fighting. They want to continue to go to court, and this thing is over with. Let's move on. I mean, that's what the process is all about. So yeah, I think both parties have this tension within them, and that's probably not going to go away.
Right. And I wonder if it, in fact, that division, this is going to be me attempting a publicly performed fit of cheerfulness, really, to say that I have my moments where I think the whole right-left configuration as a form of classification and categorization of attitudes, it just needs to go lie down in a corner and rest for a while, because there's lots of stuff where it really isn't working so well. And part of that is that the left has so many different variations and the right has so many different variations, but it's also, I just think that if we weren't shouting and screeching so much of the time, we would be able to say, oh, people who oppose abortion and support life would have every reason to unite in nutrition programs for children and support for education. And why would that ever have turned into a right-left configuration? Proper health care for children. I mean, it just seems that if you want children protected and born, you want them tended to. And so that's something that there's a bunch of stuff of this where I just think, I am just not seeing right left. I know plenty of business people who really want to have a labor supply that in lots of ways, they're not going to have it without a significant percentage of immigrants coming into the country. And so that doesn't seem that the ways in which immigrants so often assimilate and become very entrepreneurial, very much practitioners of business. So, okay, so I'm not going to go on. Everyone will be very happy to know for the next 43 minutes with more examples, but I think I could. I'm just saying, could we let that go? The right-left thing?
Yeah, it's hard. I see your point, and I think you make some really good observations about that. Excuse me, Patty. One of our earliest conversations talking about the program today, I pointed out that part of the polarization between the two parties is that the two parties used to be much more diverse than they are now today. There was a great book written a couple of years about the 1968 presidential campaign, and it spent a lot of time talking about how in those Democratic and Republican presidential processes, that back in the 60s and the 50s, there genuinely was a block of liberal Republicans in the Republican Party, and then conversely, a block of conservative Democrats in the Democratic Party. And so both parties had to come to grips with these ideological gaps within their own party. And that caused the parties to kind of result somewhere close in the center whenever they nominated candidates. And I thought that was really, we don't have that today. I mean, there is no doubt that the Republican Party tilts conservative, hardcore in many ways, but the Democratic Party has been shifting left as well. And I think that that's part of the problem we have today is the parties don't have to pay attention to the middle or to the other side of the spectrum. And I don't know, I don't think that's going to change, but I think that partially explains what we're having today. So.
And I guess based on nothing except anecdotal evidence, which is what we get to have in the humanities. That's what we have in the humanities. Very delightful to take in some stories and reflect on them. But I think the majority of the American people are in the center, and they don't have elected representatives as they did in the past. And so they have no voice. And yet I think they're the majority. And otherwise, I have been living a life of, I've been in candid camera with Derwin Kirby and Alan Funt sending actors to me to pretend to be American citizens who are actually actors pretending that they are, so the people I meet, I just think, I'm not seeing these lines of division. So you've spoken, I think you should talk a little bit about what you said about the threat of a primary for a moderate Republican. What happens to a moderate Republican who's going to face a primary?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's been, listen, Senator Gardner, who just got defeated by John Hickenlooper, had that in front of him the entire 4 years. Now, there was no way Corey was going to not vote for the Trump agenda, which is more accurately described as a Republican agenda. I mean, the thing that always amuses me is when the people talk about the Trump agenda. I got to tell you, tax cuts, there's conservative judicial nominations, and deregulation would have been put forward by Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio or Scott Walker or any of the other candidates we had in 2016. But I think one of the criticisms Corey got is that he never spoke up when Trump would go on his tirades and on his Twitter feeds. And but the problem with that is that, and this is what Republicans around the country faced, is that had he done so, he would have been another one. He would have had tremendous backlash in the Republican Party, and second of all, probably would have had to deal with a primary in this election. So it's a real tightrope that Corey and many other Republicans walked, and it will be interesting to see how Biden somehow deals with the divisions in his party now that he's president, and you have a very activist, ideologically liberal base in the Democratic Party.
Right. And I guess I wonder though, okay, so I was thinking of asking, what do the Never Trumpers, the Lincoln Project, what should they be doing now that would redeem their nation, that would help in this whole process of getting out of the chaos and into a better framework? And then as you speak now of that tightrope, they're still on that tightrope. That didn't go away. That if the Never Trumpers spoke forthrightly into the future, they will still be a subject to condemnation from the folks who think that the election was stolen.
Yes.
So their vulnerability, the chances of the people, the conservatives, of whom the list is huge. I believe the list is huge, of conservatives who dissented from Trump's temperament and from his refusal of the election results and so on. That's a huge list. And yet it's still a tiny minority, I guess, of the Republican Party. So they're still on the same tightrope that Cory Gardner was on. And so I was going to say, I thought, oh, we'll figure out something very good for them to be doing these days. And then I thought they should probably just protect themselves, huh?
Yeah, a lot of those Never Trumpers that formed the Lincoln Project and a couple of other groups that were blatantly supporting Joe Biden in the presidential election, most of them, frankly, have left the party for good. I mean, they are so anti-Trump. They hate Trump. I don't hate Trump. In fact, I still think that he did a very good job on a lot of policies. But they hate him, and they've kind of gone off the cliff in terms of ever coming back into the Republican Party. The hardcore Never Trumpers that were involved in the Lincoln Project. But I think what you're talking about, Patty, are more, for lack of a better term, more mainstream Republicans who now, with Trump at least not being in the presidential race, can be more who they are. Although, let me just say, President Trump is going to be a factor in the Republican Party even after January 20th, and he will get involved in some primaries. He's already threatened the primary against Governor Kemp in Georgia, and there will be other Republicans he'll probably get involved with. But it's different, though. He won't have the same power base he did as president, and yet he's going to be quite an influence on the party still. So
I see that. So I will just say personally that I want the Republicans restored and healthy, because I created a bipartisan Center of the American West because I knew so many people who I found to be congenial, problem-solving sorts. So I am the greatest champion of, I don't know, this doesn't seem to have yet become a slogan, but I hope it does, which is, it's called GOP. Let's get the grand part back.
Yeah.
Let's do that, because the tradition from Abraham Lincoln through really important conservation, environmental conservation things, the Republican Party has an absolutely enviable tradition in matters ranging from human rights and abolition to environmental conservation. So I want the grand part back. Help me.
Well, yeah, I understand what you're saying. You know, I can't help but think about former House Speaker Russ George,
who's in our group. Yes.
Russ was the speaker when Governor Owens got elected governor in 1998. That 99, 2000, those legislative sessions were when Governor Owens enacted a great deal of his agenda to cut taxes, to his education reform plan, and his transportation plan. And Russ George was one of the big reasons that got through the legislature. I mean, they worked hand in hand. I think back fondly to those days when we had Russ George's as part of our leadership in the party. In addition, and I worked for Governor Owens for 3 years after I ran his campaign, so I saw that up close and personal. So we need more of that. So.
And I wonder, and this may be a, well, okay. So I wonder, will the Republican Party really make a formal separation from white supremacists? Trump left that kind of blurry.
You know, Patty, I don't think that it was not one of his finer moments because he wasn't as definitive as he should have been. But I think both parties go off the rails on some of this, some of these issues dealing with racism. I think Democrats, their failure to condemn the rioting in so many, including Denver, by the way, but in Portland and San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, this past summer. I mean, they didn't even mention the rioting and I'm not talking about the legitimate protests. There's nothing, there was nothing inappropriate about legitimate protests. But when they turned into destructive mobs, like they did in Colorado, I think the Democrats should have condemned that, and they really didn't. They kind of got dragged into it, and so I don't think both parties are. I think both parties should have been more vocal in their own ways about this. But I really think the Democrats fell down on the anarchy that they kind of silently. They didn't support it, but their silence was deafening in that.
Right. And I guess, I mean, I'm in agreement with that. And I would say that a place that you haven't mentioned, but the condemnation of people appearing at Trump rallies without a mask and the lack of that condemnation of people appearing at Black Lives Matters and some percentage of people without masks there. That was a very striking inconsistency, that the liberal lamentations were much more directed at the Trump populations without masks. So oh goodness gracious, we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, is what I'm going to now say. It's really escalating to a theological thing there. So, but still, to say, to speak of the Proud Boys and so on, to stand down and stand by, or whatever. There were some remarks there that I would want a lot more alliance with Abraham Lincoln and a lot more recognition of Theodore Roosevelt and conservation. I would like to have more people wearing our t-shirt, which is Center of the American West t-shirt, quoting from a noted Republican, Gifford Pinchot, the chief forester, and Theodore Roosevelt. And this is a quotation from Gifford Pinchot that says, "It is a greater thing to be a good citizen than to be a good Republican or a good Democrat." And one of these t-shirts could be yours if you'd be interested in having one of those t-shirts. But anyway, I think that there's something about alliance and alignment with the heritage that the Republicans, I'm the armchair quarterback. That's what it said on the program. So
no, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. I'm not planning to weaken the Republican Party by saying that. I'm trying to get that. Well, we have a question. We have some questions, but I have to tell anonymous attendees that the word is that we don't actually, we're not going to get through that many questions, but we spent at another program too much time talking with an anonymous attendee, and we didn't even know who we were talking to or what to do with it. So we are not going to be recognizing, we'll take the questions and ponder them later, but if you would like to have a question that we might use, we would want, we have quite a few anonymous attendees, but probably not likely. So I do want to, we have a former congressman who has asked you a question, so I think we should definitely include that because this is a very experienced person. Dick, it's David Skaggs here.
Great. Hi, David.
So may we count on there not being a repeat from Mitch McConnell of his approach to the Obama administration, i.e. opposing almost everything, including judicial appointments?
I don't know. I know that I'll just go back to this, that Biden and McConnell have a long time relationship. Of course, McConnell had no relationship with Obama. So I think that's the difference between a President Biden and a President Obama in terms of Mitch McConnell. And so we'll see how that develops. But and I understand what David is saying, but listen, President Obama wasn't exactly, he could be confrontational as well. I mean, so that he was not without his own political scent on that front. So
Would you,
I think the difference is the relationship, the personal relationship that Biden and McConnell have going back decades. I think that's the difference there.
no, it's a very interesting test. We have one or two questions asking us to speak about monuments and memorials. And so we'll get back to mainstream politics in a moment. Well, I guess we're not leaving mainstream politics with that. And you wrote a good Denver Post piece about that. And so, and I have written a bit on it myself, and I have some attitudes that might be predictable from an academic and some that are not. So I would, why don't we start off with a quick paraphrase of what you said when you wrote about monuments and memorials and our attitude towards history and our struggles at getting a form of civic discussion of history that could be productive. That's not a good paraphrase of what you said, but why don't you start us off?
Well, I mean, the point I made, and I write a monthly column for the Denver Post. It was 2 or 3 months ago. I wrote one regarding this headlong trend towards just tearing down monuments and memorials and statues of any kind. I mean, it started with Confederate statues in the South, which and then it just, now I read today that now Lincoln is becoming a target because he was a racist in some people's minds. I just think this has gotten totally out of control. And one of the points I made in the column I wrote is that Franklin D. Roosevelt probably implemented one of the most racist policies in American history when he signed that executive order creating internment camps across the country, including in Colorado and at Camp Amache near Grenada, down in part of the state I grew up in. And in fact, I had classmates, Patty, growing up whose parents and grandparents were interned there. And then they stayed in the Arkansas Valley after the war. But who would propose that Franklin Roosevelt's memorial in Washington should be torn down if you because of that? Now, he in my mind, he was a great president. I mean, I think he led us through the Second World War. He dealt with the Great Depression. I know George Will likes to say, a great conservative columnist, that he probably saved the United States and saved capitalism by his performance during that. So, but if we go on the narrow definition of someone who should be obliterated from history, Franklin Roosevelt ought to be obliterated because that policy was despicable. And yet I wouldn't for a moment suggest that his monument or memorial be torn down. I think that we just reached such an extremism on this thing. And I feel the same way about that Civil War soldier in front of the state capitol. I'm actually very dismayed that the Capitol Building Advisory Committee has decided to not put that soldier back. He was put up there in 1909 to honor the Colorado 1st and 3rd Cavalry Regiments, who played a key role in saving the Union in the Civil War when they defeated the Confederate Army at the Glorieta Pass in New Mexico. And yet, because there were some soldiers that participated in the Sand Creek Massacre, and I understand that. But same with Roosevelt. Does that obliterate the key role they played in saving the Union, in saving the United States of America? So I think we've just gone over the cliff on this, on the destruction of monuments and statues, and I really am strongly opposed to this. So anyway.
Right. So we are not exactly peas in a pod on this one, but we are both sharing the conviction that this is not the way to handle history.
Right.
And I'm going to take just 2 or 3 minutes for my thoughts, which are that it is a terrible thing to do to a historic figure to put them up in bronze. That's a terrible thing to do. It makes them boring. Bronze pits, they have to be cleaned all the time. I mean, it's if anyone ever, after my passing, if there are young people listening, and this is most unlikely, but if somebody says, why don't we, Patty Limerick really loved Colorado and let's try to put up a statue of her in bronze. No, young people, no, don't let it happen, because it's a way of making a person boring and lifeless, which they were not alive. So I think something wasn't brilliant about the choice of that form of paying attention to history. And it was a fashion. It was a fashion in the early, like 19th century and early 20th century. And it wasn't deep thinking that led to that. It wasn't, yes, that's exactly the way we should remember history. I have never in my life heard a person say, I became a historian because I walked by a statue one day. And that just made me think, that's my vocation, that's my calling. So, okay, so that would be the bedrock for me, is thinking historically about these monuments and why they seem like a good idea. They seem like a good idea because they were the opposite of amnesia. Amnesia is very bad. Amnesia, when it hits an individual, is very bad, and you rush them to a neurologist. Amnesia, when it hits the society, just as bad. The neurologists don't really come to your help there. So historians should be coming to the aid of an amnesiac society. Our training program for young historians, not so good for that. So my dream, okay, the worst thing that can happen with history for me is when people just yawn, when they say, they're just dead. They were kind of always dead, weren't they? So very bad. No sense of connection, no sense of who these people were to us and how they still shape our world. If you were interested in public lands, you run into the ghost of Theodore Roosevelt every few days. I mean, he's so alive. It's actually kind of unnerving to think how much some of these people live. So that's why I just think the monuments do them a great disservice by making them seem dull. So what should we have instead? Well, every time we have a controversy, we have a spectacular opportunity for a full engagement of the public with history. It couldn't be better, because really, you don't know what my life is like sometimes. You go to I don't go to a cocktail party, because whoever does that anymore, but I would go and people would say, what do you do? Oh, I'm an historian. And they'd say, oh, I never liked history. We had to memorize dates. Oh, wait, it's not like that. So I am really taken when there is adrenaline in the spirit there. So I would say that everyone disappoints me on this. The people who made the monuments, the only people who don't disappoint me are the people of the past, who were complicated and interesting. And if there was one among them who was just as simple and easy to categorize as the sun has risen this morning, then that is a person we wouldn't be paying any attention to, because they would be so boring. So that is a long-winded way of saying, let's figure out how to take these opportunities. We're nowhere near that.
Yeah.
And in fact, the relationship between, there's a tiny chance that I might be disconnected for a moment here. So, okay. So Kurt will come in and fill in for me.
Uh-oh.
Greetings, everybody. This happens on occasion. Patty had to.
She's back.
Oh, she's back.
Yes.
No.
Internet connection is unstable, but that is fine. I don't mind a little bit of instability. I guess that's what I was speaking about. So thank you, Kurt. I think I'm back here. Okay, thank you. So I just think having noted public figures in open, lively conversation about the people of the past, that's a service to them. That is a tribute to them. And to rush to their defense is to simplify them. To condemn them is to simplify them. And I just feel I'm on an anti-simplification campaign, and I feel you were my ally in that.
Patty, do you remember the debate back in the 80s? The Colorado congressional delegation decided to create a process to place Colorado's second statue in the United States Capitol, because we already had one since the 50s, Dr. Florence Sabin, which is a great choice. I mean, she had done all that work on tuberculosis and our public health system. And there was a lot of discussion, well, we need to get our second statue in Statuary Hall, or actually the Capitol overall. And a process was determined, it was kind of laid out. And we ended up, and a lot of historians, you might have been involved with that. I don't, my memory is a little hazy on who was involved, but the delegation was involved. And the process ended up having Jack Swigert, the astronaut from Apollo 13. He's now, of course, his statue is in the Capitol. a replica of that statue is out at Concourse B at DIA. But I thought that was a magnificent process and a great choice, because Jack kind of, I think, captured in many ways what makes Colorado special in terms of looking to the future, which only an astronaut in many ways could. I thought that was and I understand what you're saying about statues overall, but I thought that is the kind of thing we should embark upon in terms of history and remembering people. And I've thought a lot about that, about how Colorado, I think, has two great people in the Capitol, Dr. Sabin and Jack Swigert. I think it's just we really have done better than any other state in that process. But
I think that's a really good point. And when we are in the feisty mode, we are not pointing out those, not that you were either I or ever in that, but when other people are in there, we don't get to that point of saying, well, here's one that really worked. Here's a way in which we've paid attention to the past. And I would say what just happened a day or two ago with the Negro Leagues getting recognized as major leagues. That's sort of like, well, that's pretty good.
I
And
thought
it
that was
happened
great.
a long time ago and so on. But that was a place where instead of now we're all going to shout at each other, it was really, well, right. Now,
Well, and I would mention Governor Nikki Haley of South Carolina, in the aftermath of those horrible killings in the church in Charleston, when there was a lot of debate about removing the Confederate flag off the South Carolina state flag, Governor Haley did it right. She went to the state legislature and she said, listen, we need to deal with this. We need to remove the Confederate flag, but we need to do it in an open way, enlist the public's input, and then we need to develop a new flag. And that's what they did. That's the way to do it. Not have angry mobs running around tearing down every statue. I think a lot of these mobs don't even know what the statue is. But there are ways to do this, to have these discussions, and there are ways not to. And I think we've seen both. So.
Right, and join me in the cause of these creation of these. There would be called. I had a very clever name for them, but they're sort of emergency SWAT teams of young historians who come rushing out and provide the more complicated story that is not there on in the midst of it. So if you'd like to join me in that cause.
Great, yeah.
Really
I'd mention one other thing too. Remember, I think everyone was appalled when the Taliban in Afghanistan, I think I've got my facts straight on this, when they used artillery to destroy those 1,000-year-old statues of Buddha. Am I right about this? And how I think we were all I think most people were appalled that the Taliban, which had taken over the government of Afghanistan, would do something like that to destroy these statues. Well, I think that's what we've had in the United States. We've had our own kind of Taliban out there destroying a lot of the statues of the past. And I just know I'm not sure, and that's not the right process to have, is that to destroy things without a legitimate public debate and process to make these decisions. So,
especially when it has stirred up the interest that is hard to stir up when people are telling you at cocktail parties that they were bored by history.
Yes, yeah.
So that's my baseline here. So we have a few things that I want to take up here in the questions. And one of them, good heavens, could someone have written critically about me? Could that have happened? For heaven's sake, we have a case here where and you'll of course defend me. You don't need to, because this is no, and this is a perfectly legitimate criticism here. This is from our wonderful friend Shiloh Brooks, who is bringing, I'm proud to say, Cornel West and Robbie George in their famous conservative liberal thing. I think January 21st, I think, is when they're here. Great. So that's good. Well, they won't be here. They'll be on a screen like us. So, okay. So Shiloh is pointing out that I seem to have focused my remarks on the polarizing influence the right has had on American politics in recent years. I don't know if that's what I was saying about the conservatives who had concerns about the president. I'm not sure I was saying that. I think I was kind of celebrating those folks, but I am curious what features, that's not the point of his question. I'm curious what features of polarization you would attribute to the left. I wonder whether, for example, you think the left is responsible for some measure of cultural polarization as opposed to directly political polarization. The left runs many of the mainstream entertainment institutions in America, movies, music, television, and many of the media institutions, newspapers, book publishing companies, etc. Yes. And I guess I am so unempowered in those circles that I don't quite know what to do with that. I think there is more complexity in the music, for instance. I think there's a lot of range of opinions expressed there, but I am so not good at popular culture. I guess what I would say is that I have heard as many, going back to politics, I've heard as many stereotyped, overgeneralized characterizations of conservatives from liberals as I have heard in the other direction. I have not kept an account book, but I certainly have been the odd one out in a number of situations going, I don't think that was accurate. I don't think that was fair. I don't think that really applied to that. So I certainly am quite, not always extremely popular at the moments when I'm pointing that out, but there's no way that I would say, oh, are we talking about the open-minded, tolerant left? Is that who we're talking about now here? Because the troubles, my wonderful friend, John Peedy, who is the current chairman of the National Endowment for the Humanities, pointed out in a speech he gave for the Benson Center recently. He said, we send 18-year-olds to war. We risk them physically. And then we say that an 18-year-old is too fragile to read a book of a certain kind. And we protect them from that book. So that was John just a couple of weeks ago. And yeah, what's that about? The paternalist stance, the protectiveness? What's that supposed to be about? So I have certainly done my time and will do more of my time of saying, wait, if we're going to do the liberal tolerance thing, then let's be tolerant. So would you like to take a jab or two with the left on this one, Dick, or did you want me to have so fun?
It exists on both sides, and I hear Republican and conservative friends of mine who do believe the other side is evil and they couldn't imagine. And it frustrates me because, as I said in my opening remarks, I've been involved in some really tough campaigns. I believe in running very aggressive campaigns for my candidates over the years. And I've been on the opposite side of a lot of Democrats who were running the other side. And yet, because we have maintained really strong relationships over the years, because I knew them as people in addition to political opponents. And I think maybe that's the difference. I've been exposed to, one of the things I enjoy most until COVID came along, Lynn Bartles and Alan Salazar and Mary Alice Mandrich and I get together for lunch about every 3 or 4 months. Marvelous discussions. Well, I've been on the opposite side of both of those two in campaigns in the past. And yet I just thoroughly enjoy being around them. I don't think a lot of people who are involved in politics ever get to know the other side. Right. And Patty, it wasn't until you raised having this discussion today that I really thought about that, what an advantage it is for somebody like me as hard as I've played the game, and I have played it hard, but so have my counterparts, but we still like each other and we get along and they're good people. And so that's the difference. So anyway.
Yeah, and I'm not going to, this will be just 14 seconds, but I used to be extremely brilliant at ping pong as a kid, and I loved it when someone played hard against me.
Yes.
And I was insulted when they didn't. I was really very miffed by that. So I know that politics has far more serious stakes, but there's still that. So we have a couple of questions, that one of which is really close to something that I wanted to ask about. If we were to just take de-center Donald Trump and maybe not even use the name, but identify the 4 or 5 places where conservatives and liberals really are on different tracks of conviction. So what might, just a few, 2 or 3 things where there is, I would say for a lot, like immigration, I don't think it's really that much of a sharp division. So, but there are other places where it is separating noise from signal. There are serious areas of disagreement. And so we have Richard Kiefer here saying, would Dick care to define the word conservative? And I see that it's very compatible with what I'm saying of where would this Vulcan mind meld group hug thing just not be helpful, and would blur the fact that there really are things that need to be reckoned with in very clear, direct, convivial ways, with lunch with our rivals and a good time and so on. So what would you say are the things there where the road forks?
What's interesting, Patty, is the Trump presidency also has it's redefined the Republican Party, but it is also kind of, I think, perplexed a lot of fiscal conservatives. I mean, President Trump did not care at all about the deficit and debt, as you can tell during it. He really didn't care much about entitlements. I mean, remember President Bush, when he was reelected, he said he was going to try to get a hold of entitlements and make them solvent and then that fell apart. But President Trump, frankly, was not that fiscally conservative when you look at even before COVID. I mean, he wasn't that concerned about the deficits. And so I think there will be a kind of revival among conservatives in Congress to get a handle on the spending that has happened even before COVID. So I mean, in many ways, Trump was not a conservative, and I think, frankly, a lot of conservatives acknowledge that. And so I think that's going to be an ongoing discussion. It will be reflected in party primaries. It will be reflected in the 2024 Republican nomination fight. And I don't know where it's headed, but it's definitely different than it was 4 years ago.
Yeah. So the definition of conservative.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, other than this, I'll tell you what I think it is. I believe in fiscal responsibility, strong national defense, and that very restrained federal government, and that in terms of power and scope and funding, and so that I think some of those things are at odds with what we've seen the last 4 years. Like I say, I wanted to be clear. I think that substantively the Trump administration accomplished a lot, but that I support. But there are some things that he changed, that he was not a Republican president along the lines of a Reagan or either of the Bushes. So.
Right. Well, and really, as a big fan of Alan Simpson and the Simpson Bulls,
right?
I have not known.
They were deficit hawks. Yes.
Yeah.
Trump wasn't.
So we have a few more minutes, and we have a couple of questions I want to take up. Either we have a person. Homonyms are very interesting because someone can have that interesting story about how there's a Ken Buck in North Carolina who keeps getting messages for the other Ken Buck. So we either have Governor Owens or we have another William Owens. So one of it could be the same problem of a homonym, but we do have someone named William Owens.
Okay.
In fact, we are former governor and our friend. What common ground do conservatives and Democrats have that can be followed to bring the country together and reduce the divisiveness?
Well, that's kind of the theme of our discussion today, and Patty, I do agree with you. I think there are some issues where the two parties can come together. I actually think energy policy is one. I think Republicans are not against renewables, but I do think Republicans are against just arbitrarily and artificially shutting down traditional oil and gas and even coal. I mean, I think there is a balance, and that our economy is moving towards renewables, and that's good. But I also think that and the people whose jobs are going to be lost in those sectors, I think there's been too little attention paid to that, especially in northwestern Colorado and the coal mining areas. But I do think that there could be more accomplished on that front than what it appears on the surface sometimes. And so I think those things will come out. So. Right.
And so I want to point out that we do have, speaking of a strong defense, that we have one of our spectacular representatives of the student veterans at CU, which is a group I would have you come speak with at some time, because they are really, they make us university look great. So we have, actually, I'm going to tell you this thing, and then I'm going to say that we're going to have one or two other topics come up, and then really quickly, and then this will be what we'll close on. Okay, so we have a very striking and gifted young man, Bob Drawn. These are clearly divisive times, particularly politically. What would y'all say is the most encouraging thing to you despite these conflicts? So that's going to be our last minute and a half. So hold on that. And then I want to play my historian card just for a moment and just say, do you think there is a danger, I sometimes do, that we are subject to nostalgia and we think, we think rightly that Biden and McConnell have a frame of reference from an earlier time,
Mhm.
but when was the United States not polarized? When was, I just wonder to what degree we think of a time in the past when things were better, but we're not, and we're tormented that have fallen from that. But I do think we have been through, as an historian, through distinctively trying, divisive times. I think that's true. I think that the era of the 1850s and the Civil War was worse. I think that. But I also just wonder if sometimes, why did I, 25 years ago, think that the Center of the American West should be bipartisan so that we could challenge the excessive
Mhm.
polarization? Why did I
Yeah.
think that 25 years ago? So just a little bit of a nostalgia corrective moment.
Yeah, I mean, Patty, I think a lot about, I think the period from the Kennedy assassination in 63 to Nixon's resignation in 74, that
Yeah.
11-year period, I think then you had the 60s in there.
Yeah.
I mean, Vietnam War, the assassination of Robert Kennedy, of course, and Martin Luther King. I mean, I just think that 11-year period, you talk about a tumultuous time when our nation was divided. But I agree with you. I don't think there was ever any, I don't think there was a perfect period, but I turned 18 years old in 1973. And so that's what I remember that era very well. And it was very divisive, and the country seemed unhinged a lot of the time, but we survived it.
Right. I was just reading a film proposal that someone sent me a few days ago, and it was about how the 1960s were an era of consensus and harmony or something. I thought, whoa, where was I? Where was I on that period? I was supposed to have been somewhere else. So, okay, so there is one thing that I just want to have hovering in there because it's something I have been pushing in the conversation. We don't have to take this up now because we're running out of time. But here's Kurt Nordback's great question. As a liberal, I find our one-party control of government in Colorado to be worrying. What can we do to get a Colorado Republican Party that is competitive and can make a useful contribution to the state? What would a really functioning two-party operation look like?
I really appreciate that question because, first of all, I will just criticize my party for a minute. I think we have fielded some very weak candidates with very weak agendas, and there are a lot of elections in the past 10 years, actually 18 years, we should have won that we didn't. So part of it is the Republican Party's fault on this. Second of all, I think the state has done well when we have a very competitive two-party system. And how boring would it be if we really had become a totally blue state? I don't think that serves our state well. I wouldn't want this to be an absolutely red state and where Republicans won every election and there's just a presumption of Democratic control. But I appreciate the question, and a lot of the responsibility comes back to Republicans in general. And we'll see in 2022 if Republicans can get back the party can get back on its feet again, because it is not right now. That is correct.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so now we are going to respond to Bob Drawn's question about where it is that we find something encouraging in these difficult times. And I have had my answer presented to me on a platter because he represents the young people who just this is a student who I admire very much and I'm sorry that you don't have my life, because I am pretty often in the company of these young people that I think this could work out.
Mm-hmm.
Work out, thinking all the time. And I think the student veterans, proportionately more of that, but plenty of that among the folks who are not student veterans. And so I just think there is, baby boomers, move on. Oh, baby boomers, just move on. And I'm not retiring, so that's a very hypocritical remark on my part. But I don't know, the folks who are just taking it all in and looking a little bit critically at their elders, but not getting lost in bitterness and condemnation. They're not doing the blame and bitterness thing. And so that's, you're welcome to join us in any of these Zoom calls with these young people
Oh,
because it's
great.
really,
No, I would like
it's,
that.
it's
Yeah.
really, really fun. So, okay, so then you get your round on the, where do you find your encouragement in these times? Where do you, I can't remember exactly how Bob phrased that, but I just read it there. What is the most encouraging thing to you despite these conflicts?
Yeah, well, I would probably echo kind of what you said, Patty. I'm working. I work with several really great, interesting young people. When I say young, I mean they're in their 20s and early 30s who are getting involved in politics, and they're smart and much more technologically advanced than I am, and which I appreciate. But I mean, I really enjoy being around them, and I'm a lot older than they are, and but I just enjoy being with them, and so to me, that's an encouraging part. I did say earlier that I felt that some of the younger operatives in both parties play politics in more of a blood sport, and I do think that is out there too. And they don't have the ability to do what I've been talking about, sitting down and having lunch with my counterparts and just enjoying it. I think we need more of that. So anyway.
Well, that seems great. I would like to point out my color scheme here, which is red, white, and blue. So red states, blue states, they were all represented here. And then I would like to say that my understanding of what we did today, I should say, somebody asked if this will be posted because someone would like to show this to other people. So yes, this will be posted. And I would like all of the attendees, including anonymous attendee, who I was rude to and dismissive of, even anonymous attendees, call this to the attention of your friends. I think it really could be a point of orientation, which is to say that, as I told it beforehand, what we are doing today, we are either launching and setting a trend with this kind of conversation between the two of us, or we are joining in a trend that is already underway across the nation in ways that I may not yet be seeing, or we are at least putting on a rare demonstration that the nation has alternatives to stalemate and screeching. So I think we did that. We don't know which one it was. It would be really nice if it's the trend part, but we certainly showed the alternative. And I try to think, when did I first meet you? The one thing I know for sure is that I would be trying some little act of good nature in public, and it would be not loved by everyone, and I was getting misunderstood and so on. And then there would be a message from Dick Wadhams saying, that was a good shot there. That was so that I know that for a fact, that sometimes when I had made my bipartisan let's give this a try thing, that I could, a lot of the time I would have my spirits restored and lifted by hearing from.
Thank you.
So, so thank you so much.
You bet. Thank you for having me.
And attendees, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your good questions. And I'm sorry that I ran out of time before I could get through all of them, but maybe we'll be back. Popular demand, that could happen. So thank you.